The night sky roared with thunder, flashes of lightning revealing brief glimpses of a wild, untamed wilderness that stretched endlessly around the isolated settlement. The settlers worked with frantic determination, hands trembling as they barricaded doors and windows, driven by an instinctive primal fear. Each gust of wind seemed to whisper danger, each rustle of leaves a sinister warning. James Harper, rugged and weathered beyond his 35 years, was a very embodiment of frontier resilience. Yet tonight, his eyes betrayed deep unease as he fastened thick planks across the cabin door, his breath shallow, hurried. He glanced briefly over his shoulder into the storm-shrouded forest, haunted by the shadows of memories etched permanently into his soul. The scar across his cheek, a stark reminder of survival, twitched as his anxiety grew. He spoke softly to himself, voice thick with tension, barely audible above the storm. Tonight, we hold or perish. Outside, the wind surged, carrying with a haunting, unmistakable war cry, a piercing howl that cut through the night with chilling precision. It was a sound settlers had learned to dread, a sound woven deeply into their nightmares. Every settler froze for an instant, the echo reverberating through their hearts, magnifying the terror already coiled tightly within their chests. James tightened his grip around the barrel of his rifle, knuckles whitening as he steadied himself. He knew this fear intimately, had tasted its bitterness before. Only months earlier, a similar stormy night had claimed everything dear to him, his wife, his young son. Their screams still echoed in his ears, their faces forever etched into the darkest recesses of his mind. The raiders had struck with ruthless efficiency, leaving only devastation and the cold, empty hollowness of loss behind. The shadows at the edge of the forest stirred, flickering shapes weaving in and out of view. Lightning revealed glimpses of painted faces, fierce expressions illuminated briefly. Warriors, fearless and determined. These were no ordinary adversaries. These were Lakota warriors, renowned among the settlers for their formidable tactics, unyielding courage, and devastating effectiveness. Rumors whispered about their almost supernatural abilities, a mystique crafted through countless confrontations and harrowing tales recounted by survivors. James watched with strained eyes, every muscle coiled tightly, heartbeat drumming violently within his chest. His breathing slowed, focused by the stark realization that tonight might be his last. Around him, other settlers mirrored his apprehension. Faces pale, eyes wide with dread, hands trembling slightly upon their weapons. Fear had made their blood run cold, but desperation kept their resolve intact. In the silence between lightning strikes, James heard soft footsteps approaching rapidly through the mud and darkness. He turned sharply, rifle raised instinctively. Relief flooded through him when he recognized Samuel Clark, his lifelong friend, stumbling toward him, mud-splattered and panicked. "James," Samuel gasped breathlessly, voice barely steady. "They're surrounding us. We've nowhere to run." James lowered his rifle slowly, eyes meeting Samuel's, unspoken truths exchanged in that glance. Both men understood the gravity of their predicament. The Lakota warriors were masters of ambush. Fleeing blindly into the darkness was suicide. Fighting would mean casualties, possibly annihilation, but it was their only chance. "We fight," James answered firmly, voice low yet powerful, carrying quiet authority. "We have no other choice." Samuel nodded solemnly, swallowing hard, courage flickering back into his eyes. James placed a steadying hand on his friend's shoulder, a silent reassurance passing between them. Both knew the cost of the coming battle. Each had lost loved ones to these conflicts. Each understood intimately the bitter price survival demanded. A sudden, chilling silence descended, as if the storm itself had paused, holding its breath. James strained his ears against the unnatural stillness, senses sharpened by adrenaline, heart hammering within his chest. Time seemed suspended, tension stretched impossibly thin. Then, without warning, an explosion of sound erupted. The sharp crack of rifle fire piercing the darkness, screams of panic and courage mingling as the warriors burst in the shadows, swift and relentless. Painted bodies surged through the flickering darkness, faces twisted with battle cries that rang defiantly through the stormy night. James fired instinctively, rifle kicking fiercely against his shoulder. Chaos erupted around him. Settlers desperately fighting for survival against overwhelming odds. Bullets tore through the night. Flames flickered to life as cabins were set ablaze, illuminating scenes of desperate heroism and heart-wrenching despair. James moved with grim determination, driven by survival, haunted by loss. He knew each moment could be his last. Each step could lead him closer to oblivion. As the battle reached its fevered peak, another bolt of lightning cleaved the sky, freezing the action in a stark, unmerciful tableau. James found himself face to face with a Lakota warrior, younger than he expected, but eyes blazing fiercely with intensity. They locked gazes, each man acknowledging the depth of the other's desperation, each seeing his own fear mirrored in the eyes of his enemy. The warrior hesitated, spear raised, his expression briefly conflicted, as though sensing James's hidden pain, understanding the tragic bond shared by combatants locked in mortal struggle. James, startled by this fleeting glimpse of humanity, felt his finger loosen upon the trigger, hesitation gripping him, the conflict within tearing at his resolve. In that split second of doubt, a deafening shot echoed behind him, and the warrior fell, eyes still locked upon James, expression softening in a final, profound moment of recognition. James turned sharply, seeing Samuel lowering his smoking rifle, eyes hollow with a mixture of relief and remorse. James stared silently at the fallen warrior, haunted by the brief connection forged and lost in an instant. Around him, the fierce battle raged onward, the flames casting eerie, dancing shadows over the carnage. He felt an undeniable shift within himself, an unsettling awareness that the line between enemy and ally was blurred, uncertain. James's heart pounded heavily as he prepared to dive back into fray. The night was far from over, the outcome uncertain. Yet now, a seed of doubt had taken root, a seed that whispered questions about the true nature of fear, courage, and survival. Thunder roared again, louder and more defiant, as James steadied himself, determination and uncertainty warring within him. The storm was only just beginning. Dawn broke cold and gray, the pale morning sunlight struggling through dense clouds to illuminate the grim aftermath. James Harper staggered painfully through smoldering ruins, smoke still rising like ghostly tendrils into the sky. He paused, swaying slightly, eyes hollow with exhaustion and grief. The settlement, once vibrant with life, now lay reduced to charred skeletons, empty echoes of dreams violently extinguished. Blood seeped slowly from a wound at his side, staining the torn fabric of his shirt a deeper crimson. James felt strangely disconnected, his mind fogged by pain and haunting memories of battle cries and burning timber. He moved slowly, driven more by instinct than purpose, into the forest's edge. Behind him lay devastation. Ahead, an indifferent wilderness stretched endlessly, vast and unwelcoming. Hours blended into a relentless, fevered struggle as James pushed deeper into the woods. The dense underbrush tore at him mercilessly, branches whipping across his bruised skin, yet physical torment paled in comparison to the grief consuming him. Visions of his family, smiling faces turned ghostly pale, rose repeatedly before him, each memory twisting deeper into his soul. Eventually, strength deserted him completely. James collapsed beside a murmuring stream, consciousness slipping gently through numb fingers. His eyelids fluttered shut, welcoming oblivion, only to snap open abruptly at the sensation of being watched. Slowly, painfully, he raised himself onto one elbow, heart racing with primal dread. Standing silently across the stream was a Lakota warrior, tall, poised, expression unreadable. His dark eyes studied James intently, revealing nothing. For a heartbeat, James's fear surged fiercely, memories of battles and burning cabins flooding back. Yet the warrior remained motionless, calm and inscrutable, a presence more enigmatic than threatening. James opened his mouth to speak, but found only dry silence. The warrior approached deliberately, his steps graceful, assured. James braced himself for violence, yet none came. Instead, the warrior stopped at arm's length and gently dropped a leather pouch at James's feet. Without a word, he turned and disappeared soundlessly back into the dense forest. James stared after him, bewildered, his pulse still thundering loudly in his ears. Tentatively, he reached for the pouch, opening it cautiously. Inside, dried meat and medicinal herbs rested, a lifeline given freely by a stranger who had every reason to leave him to his fate. The following days unfolded in slow increments of survival and recovery. James moved cautiously through the wilderness, instinctively aware he was not alone. Frequently, he glimpsed a warrior at a respectful distance, a silent guardian whose intentions remained unclear. Initially, suspicion lingered stubbornly, born from deep-rooted prejudice and pain. Yet, gradually, something shifted within James. The warrior's subtle gestures, showing safe paths, silent warnings of predators, began melting away layers of mistrust and resentment. During one particularly harsh evening, a violent storm erupted suddenly, trapping James beneath whipping branches and relentless rain. Shivering violently, drenched and despairing, he stumbled onward until finally collapsing under a tree. As hope faded, the warrior reappeared through sheets of rain, effortlessly constructing shelter from branches and foliage. James watched silently, humbled by the quiet strength and competence of the man he once considered an enemy. When morning arrived, the storm had passed, leaving a world freshly washed and strangely peaceful. James emerged from the makeshift shelter, finding the warrior already awake, tending a small fire. He hesitated, then quietly approached, sitting opposite the fire. Their gazes met briefly, a fleeting exchange charged with silent gratitude and cautious respect. "Koana," the warrior said quietly, tapping his chest lightly. James nodded slowly, recognizing the significance. "James," he replied, voice hoarse but firm. In that simple exchange, barriers weakened, replaced by a tentative understanding. Communication remained sparse, words rare and precious, each carrying weight beyond mere sound. James learned quickly, imitating Kohana's precise movements through the forest, studying the warrior's keen awareness of the environment. Their relationship strengthened through quiet gestures, shared meals, mutual vigilance against hidden threats, and small acts of generosity. Yet, James's inner turmoil persisted. Nights became times of silent torment, memories relentlessly invading his dreams, guilt clawing viciously at his soul. He wondered how he could find peace when hatred and fear had defined so much of his life. Koana seemed to sense James's struggle, watching him with patient eyes, offering no judgment, only quiet companionship. Days stretched into weeks, marked by the rhythm of survival and mutual reliance. As trust deepened, James began to see beyond the warrior's painted face and silent strength. Koana, too, carried hidden grief, subtle shadows crossing his features during quiet moments, a reflection of James's own pain. It was this recognition, this mirrored suffering, that truly solidified their bond, transcending differences born of culture and history. One twilight evening, as they sat quietly beneath a crimson sky, James's gaze turned reflective, sorrow tinging his expression. Koana observed quietly, sensing the shift. "I hated your people once," James admitted softly, shame evident in his voice. "Blamed them for everything I'd lost." Kohana's eyes softened slightly, a quiet acknowledgement of the pain behind James's confession. Silence lingered comfortably between them, the honesty of the moment speaking louder than any reassurance could. Yet now, James continued softly, staring into fire, "I see something else, strength, courage, wisdom. I never thought I would learn from someone I feared." Koana inclined his head slightly, a subtle gesture laden with dignity and acceptance. James felt a profound shift within himself, a release of bitterness, replaced by newfound clarity and humility. The man he had once feared now represented something entirely different: hope, redemption, and a path toward healing. The moment was interrupted abruptly by distant voices echoing ominously through the forest. Both men turned sharply, alerted simultaneously by the unmistakable sounds of danger. Kohana's eyes narrowed, expression hardening instantly into readiness, while James instinctively reached for his rifle. The fragile peace they had nurtured now faced a deadly test, the harsh reality of their world intruding violently upon their newfound bond. James exchanged a swift, determined glance with Koana, both men understanding immediately the gravity of their predicament. Their bond, forged carefully through survival and trust, would now face its fiercest challenge yet. James tightened his grip around his rifle, every nerve coiled tightly with anticipation. Voices echoed again, growing louder and harsher, revealing the intruder's hostile intentions. Koana motioned silently, urging James to follow. Instinctively trusting the warrior, James moved swiftly, weaving through the forest with newfound agility born from weeks of subtle lessons. They navigated dense thickets and jagged terrain, their movements perfectly synchronized, a testament to trust painstakingly built through silent cooperation. Koana guided James away from immediate danger, deeper into unfamiliar lands that whispered secrets of resilience and survival. Yet the threats multiplied relentlessly. Predators lurking, harsh storms battering their resolve, testing the limits of physical and emotional endurance. Winter descended mercilessly, coating the land in unforgiving ice and relentless winds. The landscape became cruel, challenging their very will to survive. James struggled, initially faltering beneath the weight of nature's relentless fury, but Koana never wavered. His resilience became James's compass, guiding him through despair to a strength he had never known possible. One frigid evening, snow blanketing the earth beneath a brittle twilight, they sought shelter within a rocky outcrop, fire crackling feebly against biting cold. James shivered violently, hands raw and numb from exposure. Koana calmly tended the flames, his actions precise, patient. Without words, he taught James fire-making, the subtle gestures and precise movements illuminating a silent, powerful lesson. James mirrored Kohana's motions, his initial awkwardness melting into growing competence, igniting within him a quiet pride. As flames flickered warmly against a harsh night, James, unexpectedly vulnerable, stared deeply into the fire. Memories resurfaced unbidden, images of his lost wife and son, smiling faces turned ghostly in the flames. A quiet, aching sorrow etched itself deeply across his features. Koana noticed immediately, silently observant yet respectful of James's grief. Unable to hold back, James's voice broke the profound silence. "I lost them to your people. I carried hatred for so long." Koana remained silent, gaze compassionate yet firm, offering neither pity nor judgment. Instead, his presence itself became comfort, an unspoken acknowledgment of shared humanity and sorrow. For the first time, James felt understood without words, connected by something deeper than language or culture. Tears welled, then fell quietly, cleansed away by the gentle crackle of the fire. Days passed into a rhythm of relentless perseverance, the two men surviving side by side against nature's unpredictable cruelty. Wild beasts prowled menacingly in the shadows, yet Koana always anticipated danger before it struck, teaching James how to listen to nature's subtle warnings, how to read signs invisible to untrained eyes. James grew, not just in physical capability but in emotional strength, shedding prejudices that had shackled him for too long. On one clear morning, as sunlight pierced the canopy, illuminating the vibrant landscape, Koana stopped abruptly, eyes narrowed, senses alert. James froze, following the warrior's silent cue. Moments later, a massive mountain lion emerged stealthily from the underbrush. Its gaze locked hungrily upon them. James's heart quickened, adrenaline surging fiercely. With deliberate calm, Koana indicated for James to remain still. Then, slowly, precisely, the warrior stepped forward, standing firmly between James and the snarling predator. The animal growled threateningly, 10 seconds stretching unbearably. Koana held his ground, unflinching, radiating calm confidence. James watched breathlessly, awed by the warrior's courage, acutely aware of his own transformation, his instinct to fight replaced by quiet trust in Kohana's judgment. After a tense standoff, the animal hesitated, wary of Kohana's steady determination, then retreated silently into the shadows. James released a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding, admiration and gratitude flooding through him. Koana glanced back, a subtle nod conveying deep respect, acknowledging James's trust. James returned the gesture solemnly, understanding the profound significance of the moment. In the aftermath, James and Koana continued their journey, the shared encounter further solidifying their bond. James no longer saw an enemy. Instead, he saw a mentor, an ally, and now unmistakably, a friend. The wilderness around them, once intimidating and alien, became a shared space, shaped by mutual understanding and respect. But tranquility, they both knew, was tenuous. The frontier remained merciless, offering no guarantees of lasting peace. Soon, another threat presented itself. A band of hostile settlers driven by vengeance, blindly hunting warriors they considered savage enemies. James recognized familiar faces among them. Men who had once been friends, now consumed by hatred, trapped in the cycle he himself had escaped. As he observed the advancing settlers from a concealed vantage point, James felt conflicted, heart heavy with sorrow. Coanna noticed his turmoil. Placing a reassuring hand lightly upon James's shoulder, eyes filled with empathy. It was a simple gesture, yet powerful enough to strengthen James's resolve. He knew now where he belonged, not with those driven by fear, but beside Coanna, the man who had taught him genuine honor. James squared his shoulders resolutely, making his choice. He would not abandon Coanna. He would fight beside the warrior who had redefined his understanding of strength, courage, and humanity. His heart pounded fiercely, fueled by clarity and newfound purpose. The coming confrontation was inevitable, but James was no longer afraid. Not of Lakota warriors, nor the wilderness, nor even of death itself. He met Cohanna's steady gaze. Determination mirrored clearly between them. Both men understood the peril they faced, the depth of the struggle awaiting them. They needed no words, only the silent assurance of unwavering trust. The trials they had endured had not broken them. Instead, they had forged an unbreakable bond, one strong enough to withstand whatever darkness loomed ahead. James tightened his grip on his rifle, exchanging a final, meaningful look with Coanna. Their silent communication spoke volumes. Whatever fate awaited them, they would face it together, united not by mere survival, but by the profound transformation each had inspired within the other. The forest seemed to hold its breath, anticipation lingering heavily. James felt a strange sense of peace amidst impending chaos, a peace born from resilience and newfound trust. The settlers drew nearer, unaware that James, once one of them, now stood prepared to oppose them. His old life lay far behind him, discarded like an empty shell. Ahead, uncertain but undeniably compelling, was a path illuminated by understanding, respect, and the quiet strength of shared humanity. With resolve etched deeply into their expressions, James and Coanna stepped forward together, ready to face whatever trials lay ahead, their bond tested but unyielding, forever transformed by trust and trials of survival. James and Coanna moved silently through the underbrush, bodies tense and alert, every sense heightened by anticipation. The bitter knowledge that James's former allies now hunted them both carved deeply into his soul, an ache only eclipsed by his newfound determination. Coanna, ever vigilant, moved with graceful confidence, his presence a calming force amid uncertainty. Ahead, voices echoed angrily, voices James once recognized as friendly, now distorted by hatred and vengeance. His heart ached, torn between the bonds of his past and the strength of his newfound brotherhood with Coanna. Every instinct screamed caution, but the weight of loyalty and honor compelled him forward. Coanna raised his hand gently, signaling a halt. James froze instantly, trusting the warrior implicitly. Cohanna's eyes narrowed, listening intently, assessing every subtle sound. He motioned toward a cluster of large rocks nearby, silently directing James to cover. James obeyed, pressing against the earth, the smell of wet soil and moss surrounding him as his pulse quickened. Every nerve hummed, sharpened by anticipation. Below them, in a small clearing, stood a group of settlers, armed, tense, restless. Their faces were grim masks of desperation, and James felt a pang of sorrow, recognizing Samuel among them, his friend's expression hardened by grief and anger. Samuel's voice carried harshly, echoing clearly into the stillness. "They took everything from us. It ends here tonight. We'll hunt them down, every last one." James winced at the venom in Samuel's tone, a stark reminder of his former self, consumed by bitterness and revenge. He knew the path Samuel now walked. It led only to darkness. His resolve hardened further, a quiet determination to stop this cycle before it destroyed more lives. Coanna touched James's shoulder softly, drawing his attention. Their eyes met, silent understanding passing effortlessly between them. The warrior's gaze spoke clearly. Violence must be a last resort, not the first. James nodded slowly, fully comprehending the depth of Kohana's wisdom. They moved into positions, preparing a calculated approach. But before they could act, chaos erupted below. A settler spotted them, shouting a harsh warning. Bullets split the air, forcing James and Koana apart. James rolled behind a tree trunk, breath ragged, heart hammering in his chest. The battle had begun, savage and sudden. Gunfire rang sharply through the forest, bullets splintering bark and leaves around James. He returned fire instinctively, movements precise, each action guided by Kohana's teachings. James maneuvered tactically, his thoughts crystal clear despite the chaos, his confidence tempered by the discipline instilled through harsh trials. He was no longer the man who once trembled in fear. Survival had shaped him into something stronger, purposeful, determined. Across the clearing, Koana moved with fluid grace, evading gunfire with quiet ease. He engaged swiftly, disabling attackers with precise, measured force, never lethal unless unavoidable. His combat was poetry, the embodiment of controlled power, a lesson James absorbed deeply even amidst the chaos. Each confrontation reinforced what James had learned. Courage and compassion could coexist, even in violence. James spotted Samuel crouched behind a fallen log, rifle trembling in his hands, eyes wide with panic. James's heart lurched painfully, compelled by friendship and pity. He called out, voice firm yet pleading, "Samuel, stop this madness. It doesn't have to end in blood." Samuel spun sharply, disbelief and anguish contorting his features. His rifle remained raised, yet doubt flickered clearly behind his eyes. "James, you stand with them?" Samuel's voice broke slightly, betrayal and confusion interwoven tightly within his words. James stepped cautiously into view, weapon lowered but stance confident, calm in the face of danger. His voice carried softly yet powerfully through the tension. "I once shared your hatred, Samuel. It brought me nothing but pain. Lay down your weapon. There's another path." Samuel hesitated, torn by conflicting emotions, rifle shaking in his grip. James watched hopefully, compassion evident, extending an unspoken invitation of peace. Just as Samuel began lowering his weapon, a shot rang sharply from behind him. James spun, horror freezing him as Koana fell to ground, wounded by a gunshot from one of Samuel's companions, eyes burning with hatred. "No!" James shouted, grief erupting violently within him. Instinct overcame reason. He moved swiftly, desperately, shielding Kohana's vulnerable form with his own. Bullets impacted the earth around him, yet James refused to retreat. His loyalty was absolute. Samuel, horrified by the unfolding violence, raised his voice urgently, commanding his men to cease fire. Gunshots faded reluctantly into tense silence. Samuel moved slowly toward James, expression profoundly altered, remorse etching deep lines across his face. James knelt protectively beside Koana, blood staining his trembling hands. His voice was steady, controlled yet filled with restrained pain. "This cycle ends here, Samuel. Let it end." Samuel stared into James's eyes, confronting a mirror of his own buried grief, his own bitter loss. Slowly, shamefully, he lowered his gaze. "You're right, James," he whispered, voice trembling with regret. "Too much blood has spilled already." Samuel gestured silently to his men, and they retreated cautiously into the forest, leaving James and Koana alone beneath a quiet sky. James turned instantly to Koana, panic threatening to overwhelm him. Yet Kohana's eyes opened slowly, pain evident but strength undiminished. Koana smiled faintly, voice strained yet calm. "You have learned well, James." James shook his head softly, eyes burning with tears, humbled by the warrior's strength even now, only because I had a wise teacher. Together, they tended Kohana's wound, James carefully applying skills learned painstakingly through weeks of trials. The bond between them deepened further, solidified irrevocably by trust forged in blood and hardship. As darkness fell softly over the clearing, James reflected quietly on his journey. Once a man shaped entirely by fear and hatred, now transformed profoundly by compassion and courage. Beside him, Koana rested peacefully, their silence a testament to mutual respect, understanding, and redemption. Yet James knew their trials were far from over. The frontier remained dangerous, its challenges relentless. Still, he no longer faced these hardships alone. In Koana, he had found not only an ally but a friend whose strength inspired his own. He gazed into the vast, star-filled night sky, feeling an undeniable sense of hope. Whatever future awaited, James Harper stood prepared. Forever changed, strengthened not merely by survival, but by the profound and enduring power of trust.